recovery tool used by many athletes when they get injured. But one major question that many high-performance sports professionals are always asking themselves is, how do all the top-notch athletes play through the pain when they get injured in competition and still come up with the win? Well, today on my show, Sunday Learnings with me, Ben Ibrahim, I asked that very same question to triple Olympic rowing gold medalist, Ginn.
You can definitely teach it. That's the first part. I think there's some people that are in tune with their body and in tune with the fine line between, dealing with pain that's fatiguing versus dealing with pain that's actually going to cause an injury. So I think there's some athletes that I've seen over my time that get that balance really well. You would actually say in my career, I was probably pretty poor at getting that right. I was generally someone who overdid it. But I think the thing that I really like is it's awareness first and foremost. So if you can make someone aware of what's going on in their body internally and the balance between the physiological impact of just general training fatigue versus the impact of wear and tear versus the impact of some sort of issue through overuse. And so it's that education, it's that upgrading of the mind and of the body, understanding that link. But the other one for me is also being able to read the situation around you, as well as being able to interpret the performance environment you're in and being able to judge whether you're going to put yourself in real jeopardy where you do yourself an injury or you do something that's actually going to cost yourself massive concerns later on. There's been a lot of rhetoric over the time as to that toughness that you need from an athlete. And probably what I would describe is it is a bit of a traditional mindset. Stories get told before the internet age. And so good stories would get told about heroes and the stuff they would put up with. I've got to dispel a few myths though. I've never met a person who's got a great story that's been told about them who doesn't turn to you and say, you know what, this part was bullshit, that part's not true, that wasn't really quite how it was.
In 2008 at the Beijing Olympic Regatta, you were in a lot of pain. Tell us about how you went through that pain or rode through that pain, not just physically, but mentally as well.
This comes back to the story, right, Ben? The sharp stabbing pain was largely when I bent over initially to get in the boat. It felt like I was getting a large needle injected into my back. But once I sat in the boat and I just sat there for a moment and breathed, all of a sudden that had sort of subsided. Now I could sort of feel this dull ache. And anyone that's had back issues know what dull ache feels like. So when you have a back issue, you can still move. You feel weak. You don't feel anywhere near as strong. And that nerve signal that's being triggered off all the time, that has your muscles shutting down. So if it hadn't been for the education through the Sydney Olympic Games, I wouldn't have understood that I probably had a period of time where I could still push through. But if this had to last for 6 weeks, my back muscles would have eroded in terms of their strength so much that I would have done myself some major issues. So we came up with a plan 2 days out from the semi-final. Effectively was, if I got on the water again for the semi-final only and only had to row 30 minutes, mentally I thought I can do that. But if you had to said to me, the coach said, you got to row every single day, we're going to do a warm-up row, we're going to do an afternoon row, that would have been too hard. So it was having something that was bite-sized that I could manage, knowing full well that getting into the boat was going to be the most painful part. And if I did anything stupid in the boat movement-wise, it might trigger it really badly and it might shut down completely. But I was willing to run that risk. And so having a great teammate as well, Duncan Free sitting in front of me, just churning out the same stroke, the same balance on the platform of the boat was really key. But knowing that within myself, I had to also call it as well, is that if I was going to hurt myself, I had to actually be able to say to stop rowing, pull to the side or whatever it might be. But the reserve for the team, Carsten Forsling, was on the bank at the start line for the final with the medical form had been filled out and all that sort of stuff. So they'd gone through the whole process of having me not row. I had my back strapped up, Panadol, which isn't overly effective as a pain medication, but that's all we could take at the games. And in the end, the distraction, I suppose, of getting into the race and having the race plan and dealing with all the fatigue and stress that comes with it anyway, that was probably distracting enough. And so I could feel the pain. And every now and then I'd get that sharp jabbing sensation, but it certainly wasn't there every single stroke, that's for sure. So Duncan Free and I had committed to each other for 3 years. So what I wasn't going to do was let him down. And I think this is about knowing yourself. So I knew that if I'd committed to someone else and I was passionate and disciplined about that, I wasn't going to let him down, right? So that was the key. I also didn't want to embarrass myself. So I wasn't going to go out there and get halfway through a race and pull the pin. So I'd done that many years ago in a national championships. I wasn't ever doing that again, right? So we learned from our mistakes. The one for me, though, was having some really clear ideas in my head as to what I needed to do. So I knew that I couldn't commit to the same length of stroke out the front as what I'd normally trained. So in my mind, it was like, right, I've got to work out a creative solution here to manage myself so I'm not overcommitting and jeopardizing myself. What I noticed though was about halfway through the race, we were traveling pretty well, but we hadn't got on top of the Canadians. And so it required a massive amount of physical effort to push through that third 500. All the while, what was most stressful was, is my back going to give away some stage here? With about 400 meters to go, what I started noticing, Ben, was my right leg, every time we push down through the stroke and we come through the stroke, my right leg, I could see my knee starting to wobble, and I could feel the whole right-hand side of my body. It was just clamping up. So in my mind, and this is the thing, like we teach ourselves how to push through, and we've done lots of training that's fatigue, but it was like, right, that's happening. This is happening, right? What have I got to do to keep modifying my stroke? So I just backed the pressure off and I rode slightly shorter. And by this stage, Duncan's pulling the boat around on me. So we're getting closer to the buoy line. So then I'm saying, boys. And at the same time, he's saying, right, I'll steer straight, try to get you out. But as soon as I hit the finish line, so this is where it really comes home. So the mind's an amazing thing. So I blocked out, I reckon, a lot of the information that was coming through just to get through the race. I laid down in the boat afterwards, and then I couldn't get back up for what must have been 5 or 6 minutes. So the whole right side of my body just switched off, and that's where the throbbing ache really came in. So I did a lot more damage during the race or through the regatta than what I'd imagined, but I had surgery when I came home. And what I'd say is the mind has a great ability to compartmentalize and separate some of those things out, but you need to have a focus. You can't focus on the pain, you've got to focus on the purpose of the race, and that was the thing that I think really helped me get through. It was a fair bit of suffering, but it was an enjoyable experience all the same.
Now, in the year 2000 in Lucerne, in a pre-Olympic rowing regatta, you had back spasms and you pulled out of that regatta and you couldn't row at that regatta anymore and you couldn't row at the Olympics. Tell us about the mental health side of things. How did you get over that? You were down about it for quite a long time, I remember.
Lucerne, I started getting really, really severe back pain 2 weeks out from the Lucerne regatta. We went to Amsterdam. We tried to race there. It made it worse. We got to Lucerne. The morning of the heat row, I should say, we're on the water, and all of a sudden I couldn't even do 10 strokes, warm up. And so the hardest thing, and this is where you talk about, the mental capability of getting through things and how it impacts your well-being, was to actually say to my partner, James Tompkins, effectively, I quit. Like, I can't do this, right? That was the hardest thing, was just saying those words. It came with a huge sense of relief, but only because all of a sudden it was like, oh, finally, I won't have to put up with going through this regatta and potentially another 7 weeks of this sort of stuff. I'd been rehabbing all season from when I first ruptured the disc in my back. What I loved, though, was I handed my hat to Matthew Long on the pontoon, and Longy is a fantastic guy. He was swapping sides in rowing, which is an extraordinary feat to do, but he'd done it through school days and all that sort of stuff. I put the hat on. There were people who were at the regatta who still thought it was James and I racing down the course in that heat road. Now, they end up getting first in the final 2 days later. So extraordinary. 7 weeks later, we're at the Olympic Games. The hardest thing for me was dealing with the demons of the idea that I'd stuffed up. And I think it takes a while for someone to realise that when you get injured, sometimes an injury can happen to you. Something fatal can actually happen to you. So that's understandable. But this wasn't fatal. It wasn't me getting injured by accident. I got injured in the gym doing something stupid, trying to show off with my friends. That's how my back injury first started, lifting too heavy weights. So the time between Lucerne and the Olympic Games in Sydney was so much time spent, realising and being pissed off at myself for the fact that I was the one that let the opportunity go. So you mentioned depression before. I'd never had anything like that at the time in 2000. We weren't talking about that sort of stuff. But what I found was my coping strategies were big nights out with friends, celebrating hard, forgetting everything that had gone on, and almost like trying to be an Olympic athlete off the field in terms of celebratory sort of life and all that sort of stuff of Sydney. But when the race came down and Longy was in the boat, and I remember watching them come from fourth to third, I was struck with being pissed off, annoyed, and then eventually a sense of pride really took over. So I think I didn't cope particularly well through the Sydney period at all. Lots of things I did were really unhealthy in terms of that sort of approach, but the teaching and the learning for me was it actually shaped me as an athlete. I had to appreciate, the limitations that we all have, but also connect with family and friends much closer. So the experience wasn't about just getting a gold medal. It was about looking after yourself and doing things much, much better in future.
You've tasted so much success at World Championship and Olympic level. Tell us about the race that you can't stop thinking about.
The two races I'll talk about specifically, because you've asked for one, and I'll give you two, right? Because I'm a bit greedy. 1999 St. Catharines, Canada, and it was the closest race at that stage I'd ever had to feeling like you'd rode perfectly for a long period of time, right from the get-go, right from the start. We enjoyed ourselves on the start line. We raced some tough competitors. We were 7 seconds out in front of the field with 500 meters to go. Like, it was sublime, you know. And every little remark we made in the boat, we seemed to respond, and things just got better and better down the course until all of a sudden we started thinking about how far the finish line was, and then all this fatigue kicked in. So 99 was, I think, you know, so close to being a perfect race for an entire race. 2007 in Munich with Duncan, you know, so that was with James. Munich with Duncan was, you know, a similar race where all of a sudden we just got further and further out in front of the field. It was almost like we were time trialing, but operating at such a high level that there was no sense of needing to slow down. There was no sense of, even if the 2,000 meter finish line comes there, it was like, well, we just keep going this speed. Yeah. So there was that sort of flow state sort of feeling. So there've been the 2 times that I've had that real sense of flow in a race. They haven't been the Olympic Games, which is interesting that you have these experiences outside the Olympic Games, and they're the ones you tend to think about, because you just know in the boat, it's almost, you almost don't feel the fatigue. It's bizarre. Like, so, yeah, where at the Olympic Games, there's pressure, so you don't always do everything right. But there's also the element of when you got pressure on, sometimes you tend to focus internally too much on how it's feeling and all that sort of stuff, that fatigue builds as well. But it's a perception of fatigue, I think. So, yeah, 99 and 2007 in particular.
Well, what a great interview. That's the end of part 1 of this episode with Drew, but part 2 continues next week, where we will learn about Drew's very successful career off the water. Before I go, I'd like to thank everybody for watching this episode and previous episodes of Sunday Learnings with me, Ben Ibrahim. But please, one small request, please subscribe to this wonderful YouTube channel, and also press the like and follow buttons on my public Facebook page, because the content of Sunday Learnings with Ben Ibrahim is also on Facebook. Like I always say to all my friends, the more followers and subscribers I have, the better chances I have of growing this channel, which will help me get more, continue to get more guests, quality guests like Drew Ginn. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Sunday Learnings with me, Ben Ibrahim.
Spaghetti, the marshmallows.